Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Crypto Leviathan podcast. I'm your host, Dalibor. Today we have a pretty famous reporter within the crypto space, I would say. I'll let you introduce yourself. His name is Matt Leising.
Hey, Dalabar, how you doing? Thanks for having me. Um, yeah, so I don't know if I'd say famous or pretty famous, but thank you for that. I appreciate it. Um, I've been around covering crypto since 2015. Uh, I've been a reporter since about 2001. Uh, a lot of that time was at Bloomberg News. I covered Wall Street and markets and market structure, which kind of made it a good fit when crypto kind of came around. Made a lot of sense to me that a network kind of approach to financial systems or other kind of industries and commerce makes a lot more sense than kind of the siloed approach that we have now. So that kind of was a bit of a light bulb moment. So this is my second or third crypto winter I've been through right now. We're in January 2023. So and in January, or sorry, in late 2021, I started my own crypto media company called Essential. I left Bloomberg and started with my partner, the documentary filmmaker Neil Berkeley. So that's what I've been doing full time since then. And we just hit our 1 year anniversary back in October, and we're just kind of raring up for another wild and fun 2023.
That's awesome to hear. So tell me a little bit about the crypto news space. Since I know it's pretty new, there isn't many reputable like news sources out there. I know CoinDesk is a big one. Tell me how that's going.
Yeah, I think I I was there at Bloomberg pretty early. I certainly wasn't the earliest reporter to get catch wind of blockchain and Bitcoin and whatnot. Um, but going through a couple of the booms and busts cycles that crypto is kind of prone to, I saw like some things in the crypto reporting area that I didn't really like. It was basically it's kind of like the environment in general, just sort of written smaller. Like when it's booming and it's a bull market, everybody wants in on the story. Editors come out of nowhere. New reporters come in and think that they can start writing about it without learning about like the fundamentals. And then as soon as the bust comes in, they're all gone on to the next thing, the next shiny object. And that just kind of bothered me because especially in tech, I think reporting, you really do need to know, as a journalist, you need to have a good understanding of the fundamentals because that's what you're going to be explaining to people. And so to be able to explain something well, you have to understand it well. So I just kind of got a little put off by, the kind of bandwagon folks that would come in. And then, when the bust cycle would hit, a lot of times then the skeptics would really be like pounding their chest and saying we told you so, and there's a lot of those people in the press for various reasons that we could get into if you want, but that also kind of bothered me as well because I don't think you see that with like when the economy is in a recession. They're not like saying, "Oh, I told you everybody was going to lose their job." It's just sort of a weird um, thing that people have about crypto and wanting their own preconceptions to be proven true. So that was like kind of what I saw, and like you said, there are good outlets, of course, and there are good reporters at big mainstream publications, of course, doing a good job. So I don't want to come off like that, but I think in general, the higher ups at a lot of places that are mainstream media still don't get it and still don't really understand what the potential here is and what the reality is as well. So that was kind of one thing I wanted to do when I started Decentral was just to put a focus on the people who are actually building this stuff, the folks that I gotten to know through writing my book Out of the Ether and just in covering the space. Because, for the most part, I find them to be really fascinating and interesting and smart and weird and funny and all sorts of stuff. And they make great characters. And it's just like as a writer, you love that, like you really like love it when somebody's got a great story to tell because you can help them tell it. So that's what we're focusing on at Essential, through podcasts and through the website and editorial content and you know just to wrap it up, I think the thing about some of that sort of when you dismiss crypto as a fad or as a scam or a Ponzi, it does a real disservice to these people who are dedicating their lives to it, and like they're jumped in with everything and they're taking a huge risk, and they're, for most part, a lot of people they're pulling it off. It's pretty amazing. Of course, there's scammers and stuff, and there's scammers in every industry, but I think by just kind of using a broad brush to say that crypto is nothing and will go to zero, it does a huge disservice to this group of people that I just mentioned, who are so fascinating and smart and weird, and like want to see a better alternative for a lot of the ways that we go about our lives, like online or through commerce and other things.
Yeah, I love how you said that, specifically about the media, because like my personal opinion about the media is I can't stand it. Like the mainstream media, they're always late on things, they sensationalize things. So like, for example, right now, like I think most people you talk to on the streets would say we are in a recession, and the media refuses to call it, right? So there's things like that where I just have a deep distrust of mainstream media because I feel
Yeah.
like they care more about fulfilling political agendas or their specific ideology versus actually reporting what's going on. To me, that's what problem I face.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems too with it, and I was, a part of it, and still am a part of it. Essential, certainly not mainstream, but I came to the realization many years ago that after seeing various, you know, I don't know, episodes or things like going back to the Iraq War, that the New York Times, for example, that's the pinnacle. Everyone in the United States, that's the gray lady. It's the paper of record. But to understand the media in this country, you also have to understand that the New York Times is an organ of state power, and what they do is they want to maintain the status quo, because there's a lot of self-interest that they have. They don't want to rock the boat, and it really does have an enormous amount of power. You could see that with what Judy, I'm forgetting her name, the reporter leading up to the Iraq War about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You could see it with the reporting on Hillary Clinton right before the 2016 election. You could see it in how they helped normalize Donald Trump and what he was doing, and it's so they do a lot of great things as well. I don't want to paint with a broad brush because that bothers me, but you do have to understand that there are elements to that organization that are very much vested into keeping the status quo and keeping like the power structure in this country as it is today.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably one where the source of distrust comes from, right? Where they just spin things a certain way or they don't report on things because, like you said, it helps preserve that power structure that they have within the country. And this isn't just the US. I would say this is a problem with worldwide media.
Yeah, I don't mean to say that that it's just a problem we have here in the United States. It's just that I'm more familiar with what's going on here. But I think, I mean, to take another example, the Financial Times has all like long been a very skeptical critic of crypto and Bitcoin and everything. And you know, I don't know how that's going these days. I don't really read it anymore, but I do remember thinking for years, like watching their coverage of just like, because you know I believe in it. It's true. It's true. I'm a believer, and I think it's got. I think because I understand it, and I think I can see where this is going. And I would just think in the back of my head, as another like snarky article, and the FT would come out, and just like, man, you guys are going to eat some crow one day, And I think we must be past that day, right? This is not going away. Like this has already changed the world, and it's going to continue. So I just don't. I don't get it. Like I guess it's just like it's a bias that people have that is really hard to get over, especially if you've been public about stuff. You really, I think people have a very hard time saying, yeah, sorry, I was wrong for all those years.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. Like I know, like even because I have my podcast, I say things that retrospectively are wrong, but it's like, yeah, I was wrong about it, right? You just move on. Like
Yeah.
people will always call you out on the internet for it. That's just how it is nowadays. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice by doubling down or tripling down positions that don't make sense.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a type of stubbornness that's really not very becoming.
Yeah, and like I think social media, particularly, I think the way how YouTube algorithms work and certain social medias, you only see things that you agree with. And I think that's a big problem because people get into these like silos where I only see this side and I don't see the other side. But if you're never exposed to the other side, how do you know that your position is right or wrong? You don't really know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a mark of a strong character, or it takes a lot to challenge yourself, like on your beliefs constantly. And I think that leads you to being more intelligent and more open and more receptive to new ideas, because that's what we're talking about here. Is there's a lack of reception to these new ideas, and there's probably a million different reasons why, but basically it comes down to a lot of people don't want things to change. They don't want a digital kind of money, a digital type of good that didn't exist before. So that's what it comes down to, in my opinion.
I agree. I think that's a big factor. I also think people have, to gain from it because at least when I follow, like, you know who Peter Schiff is, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like one of those people who always talks bad about crypto. And it's why? Because he wants to sell his gold and silver. If anyone
Yeah.
can't really make that connection, that's, I think, the problem, right? Everyone has a financial incentive to criticize something for their gain. So that's why I always try to look at is like, what's someone's gain for attacking this, right?
Yep.
But anyways, so I think the biggest news is obviously the FTX. What's been going on with FTX lately? Since I know you've been in Bloomberg, you've been covering the finance industry for a long time. So I'll just pose to you a question. Do you believe that he was guilty of fraud and why? It's a
Yeah.
loaded question, I know.
That's a loaded question. Yeah. Of course, I don't know anything more than what I'm reading in the press. What I will say is that it looks very similar to two other kind of not exchange leaders, but sort of brokerage leaders that I covered at Bloomberg, who both went bust. One was MF Global, when oh man, I'm forgetting his name again. Anyway, I'll remember it. MF Global went down, and they used customer money to try to, there was a run on the firm. Basically, they were getting margin calls, and they dipped into customer money and used that to try to fend off like the inevitable. So it was John Corzine who was running it at the time, and of course he was a senator from New Jersey. He had been the governor of New Jersey. Came from Goldman Sachs. He had a million political connections. So guess who didn't go to jail after that? Yeah, John Corzine. Another one was this guy that not many people might know of. It's Russell Wasendorf. He led a firm out of Iowa. It was a commodity brokerage firm called Peregrine. Like, he had been stealing customer money for decades, and they finally caught on to him. He had like yachts and jets and all this stuff, and so he had been basically using his customer money to fund a very lavish lifestyle. And so guess who's got a 10-year prison sentence? Yeah, Wasendorf, who even tried to kill himself right before he was convicted. So you know he had no political connections. He's in Iowa. It's a smaller firm, and so you can kind of see where I'm going with this is like they're all doing kind of the same thing. Like, you're stealing from your customers' money, right? And so that's what Bankman-Fried has been accused of, among many other things. So, but again, Bankman-Fried is very well connected, and spent a lot of money to make inroads in Washington, and with lobbying, and with just personal kind of like outreach. Obviously, he's kind of toxic right now, so I don't know what's going to happen, but this case is going to take a very long time. I don't know if you saw the story, but the Southern District of New York is saying that they might not have enough resources to try this case because it's so vast and it touches so many different areas of potential corruption, from campaign finance corruption to just outright fraud to embezzlement to all sorts of stuff. And they're like, this is like one of the most powerful prosecution offices in the country, the Southern District of New York. That's where Wall Street is, and they're like, wow, they're there. I'd never seen anything like that, so that just made me kind of like, my jaw dropped. And so I think we're going to be hearing about this case for years. And that's the thing, when maybe some of this political or the public outcry has kind of reduced in, say, 2 or 3 years when it comes to a trial or a conviction or whatever, that's when, he's not going to be in the spotlight as much. It's not going to be as toxic as it is right now. And we might see those political favors kind of come back around. So I think, though, like, to try to answer your question, the signs, the evidence really does seem to point that, obviously it was a house of cards, and he's got people flipping on him, like the CEO of Alameda and one of the CFO, I think, of FTX are both cooperating with authorities. And, something doesn't just collapse like that if it's sound. So obviously, the other crazy thing was that story of all the loans that have been made to the Block editor in chief, or the guy who runs the Block. I don't know if he's the editor in chief, but it was like $40 million down in the Bahamas, and you know that kind of stuff just smells bad. And when it smells bad, it usually is bad. So I kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, the whole situation to me was like, wow, like I'm actually convinced that this guy's probably not going to get punished. Like just because of how well he is connected politically. Like I forget what his parents do. I know they're well connected within the political system. So, and I think what isn't one of his parents in the SEC?
No, I know his parents were supposed to teach at Stanford. I think
One was right, a lawyer or
yeah,
teaches law at Stanford.
yeah, I think so. But they're not coming back because of this, at least temporarily. Is what I read. I think they have connections to like Pelosi. I think
Yeah,
they're kind of Northern California kind of in those circles. So Nancy Pelosi, of course, is from San Francisco. Um, and yeah, they had. I mean, there's been a lot of stories about how many meetings they were trying to get at the SEC and stuff like that, and I just don't think that holds a lot of water, because any exchange like that is going to be trying to get on the regulator's good side, and they're going to try to be figuring out, like, okay, what do you need us to do so we can get approval, and that happens across the board. So I don't find that anything that's not out of the ordinary. I think a lot of people were trying to make more of that, but yeah, it is true. They were spreading money around like crazy. You couldn't watch a Major League Baseball game without seeing FTX on the umpires, padding. And they had it. I think didn't they have a Formula One team, and also like
they were going to
FTX.
sponsor the Miami Heat too, their
Yeah,
arena.
yeah,
There's a lot of stuff.
yeah, right. So I mean, yeah. So that's that. But we'll see. I whether he gets punished or not, I think is a bit of an open question. But I think the amount of evidence and the amount of what the scope of this case is, like what I was saying before with the Southern District of New York, that they're not going to just let him skate. There's going to be some repercussion, whether it's jail or an enormous fine or something. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. I think if someone who wasn't like in his position, I mean, as well connected, made those right donations, I think they would be made an example of. I don't think he will be just based on that, if we compare two different people that did the same act.
Yeah. Again, that goes back to my point again
Yeah.
about John Corzine versus Russell Wasendorf.
Yeah.
That those connections do matter. And I think one thing that'll be very interesting is what happens with the customer money that disappeared. If those customers are made whole, that's going to be a different situation than if they lose everything. So I don't know how that's going to play out at this point, but I think that could be a factor in how politicians and prosecutors kind of maybe feel like they have the public on their side. If like $1 billion plus of customer money is just gone, like, that's a time to get the pitchforks and the torches, right?
And that's the thing. It's like he took money from very powerful people, right? Like I think Sequoia Capital, I know Kevin O'Leary was invested. So a lot of these big firms put a lot of money. If he lost their money, that's there. I don't
Yeah.
see them like him
No, they'll
being
be
able to
twisting
escape
arms in the
easily.
background to make sure that he gets punished.
Yeah,
For sure.
exactly.
For sure.
So I think the thing I'm most concerned about FTX is not even his punishment. I think he's just like the management of that was just bad apple, right? I think the problem is the contagion this has, right? FTX invested a ton of money in like startups and like other companies.
Mhm.
That's where I think the concern is what happens when these shares are forced to be liquidated. You know, they want their money back. They lend in money to a lot of people. That's where I think more of the issue is for me.
Yeah, and I mean the bankruptcy court, that's going to be a job for them for years to come, and that's not a process anybody wants to be in. It's awful. Um, and so, uh, yeah, I can't even imagine the complications there. So, um,
Yeah, that's where I'm concerned because I know people are saying, you know, we're in a crypto winter right now, right? But considering you, like you said, this will take time to process. Will this crypto winter be extended now because of these risks of FTX contagion? Because it'll take years down the line. I don't know.
yeah, to zoom out on the bigger picture, one thing I found interesting and somewhat heartening, I guess, maybe, is that FTX could completely implode in a couple days. And it had no effect on the broader economy at all. It was like completely contained within crypto. And those losses were bad, of course, and quite widespread, but they, didn't cause any ripple effects anywhere else. And it was sort of like it makes me of two minds. It's like that's a hell of a lot of money to lose. It's amazing. And then it also kind of makes me think, well, crypto's a little smaller maybe than we all think it is at this point, because it it didn't have like there was no cross contagion like you're saying to the bond market or the stock market or anything else. And so on the one hand, I can, you could say, oh, that's good. On the other hand, if you're a crypto supporter and you want to see this flourish, you're like, oh, I guess maybe we're a little earlier than we all kind of thought.
That's actually a great point that you said that we're earlier than we thought, because I think crypto right now is still a little bit like the Wild West, right? In terms of regulations, in terms of like guiding principles. It seems like no one was really 100% certain on what to do.
Yeah, what I like to say about that analogy is that the Wild West had laws, they just ignored them. And what crypto is, the crypto doesn't have laws. Like the nobody's writing laws for this stuff. I mean, some of it touches existing law, but I think that's a big issue that I have is that Congress needs to get its act together and write some new laws for this because you know the Securities Exchange Act and the Commodity Exchange Act and a lot of like the Federal Reserve rules never envisioned you or I interacting with a piece of code like a smart contract, that is our counterparty, for just one example. So, that needs to be, we can't rely on 1930s case law to make the rules for that stuff. I think Congress has to get together and really put some work in to create a new framework for this kind of like environment where smart contracts are operating, kind of with impunity. Because as you probably know, once you launch a smart contract, you really can't stop it. It lives on the blockchain forever. Like Tornado Cash is still live. You can't take that away. It's just that OFAC says you can't use it or will come after you. So that again, that's not something that was contemplated. I think in the current sort of laws that we have for financial and other kind of markets.
I guess my concern with particularly Tornado Cash is they're publishing the person who created that software, right? I
Yeah,
think they got detained or arrested. I don't remember the exact
yeah. He's
details.
been in jail in Denmark for many months now.
I think that's absurd, right? It's like I created a piece of software just
Mhm.
because criminals are using it. It's not like I intended to use it for criminal activity. Now he's being punished just for releasing that software. So, like you said, that's why I think they need regulations because now you're punishing basically innovation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's like putting a car engineer or a car designer in jail because somebody uses a car to kill somebody. It's like that's ridiculous because there's obviously other many lawful uses of a car, just like there's many lawful uses of Tornado Cash. So yeah, I find the whole thing absurd to be honest. I'm not sure how you can in my opinion, code is speech. So that's the thing. You can't outlaw code. It's just like you can't outlaw speech. There are restrictions, of course, and that's been well established in the case law. But You can use I could use your Cognito Cash for very like completely valid reasons, and just because criminals can use it as well, like that's where something needs to be done. Where you go after the criminals, you don't go after the thing that they're using.
I think the reason why is it's probably more difficult to go after the criminals than it is just to target the developer, but it kind of pollutes the justice system if you do stuff like that, right? Where you're going after what's easier, not what's right.
Yeah, and I mean that was a Treasury decision on its own, right? They
Hmm.
have their Office of Financial Controls, and I'm going to be very interested to watch that go through the court system, because that's who's going to kind of rule or rein them back, I think, and say, look, you guys overreached here. You can't, like we were saying, you can't just ban this thing that can be used for good or for evil. It's like you have to go after the criminals. You don't go after, you know, you don't. Yeah. So
And
I'll
this
be.
is why we need guidelines, right? Because the way I look at it, it's like someone who is trying to, do like a racketeering operation or something. They're trying to use a bank. Just because the bank catches them, now they have these regulations set out what to do when you catch this person, right? But we don't have that in crypto right now. And basically, they're punishing the person providing this service when he's like, I don't know what you want me to do when this activity happens. There is no rules.
Yeah, and that's something I hear from a lot of folks that I talk to, that want to obey the rules, but they say like we can't obey them if we don't know what they are, and they're kind of like saying to Gary Gensler and others in the government, just please give us the guidelines so that we can follow them, rather than pick some, like you were just saying, like some illegal, allegedly illegal activity that they go after, and then they sue them, and they enforce through, or they regulate through enforcement actions, which is not a good way to do it, because it's usually kind of specific to that case, and other firms that might be adjacent to what that person is doing, or firm is doing, they won't really know. Like, am I in a gray zone? Am I okay? And so that's why prescriptive laws and regulations are really necessary, so that they can, have their lawyers be like, okay, we've read all the rules and we think we're okay. We just don't have that right now, as you've been saying.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I think eventually it's going to come. I think that's actually the biggest hurdle right now in crypto because I know a lot of institutional investors want to move into this space, but the regulations and this risk, a financial risk that you say, makes them hesitant. So I think that's what's holding back innovation in this space, ironically, right now, is lack of regulation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think this year we're going to see a lot of regulatory movement, especially with FTX. I think that just pushed it right into the forefront. You can't really ignore this one, because SBF was supposed to be a good guy. He was supposed to be somebody that you could like point to and say, look, this guy's doing it right. And it turns out, we were all completely wrong about that.
Yeah, and I think it also points to is where were the checks and balances, right? How did like he took money from I think it was Sequoia Capital, Kevin O'Leary, these made high profile individuals. Did none of them verify that this guy had any financial controls? To me, it's like there seems to be a failure of at many levels here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's ironic that the centralized entities in this space have all like went down in 2022, because a lot of times when it's centralized, it's opaque and you can't see into what's going on. You don't know the balance sheet. You don't know the risks. Um, so you've got, a hedge fund like Three Arrows Capital that's like obviously completely opaque. You've got Terra Luna, which was transparent, and you could read the docs and say, "Oh my God, this could go really wrong," but that didn't stop anybody from using it. But then you've got the crypto lenders like Celsius and BlockFi, and the others that are also black boxes, where they're not telling you how they're giving you 11 or 15% interest. You just have to trust that it's all on the up and up. A lot of people, as I've been saying lately, like somebody described it to me, the people who come into crypto for the most part, like maybe 80%, have dollar signs in their eyes and absolutely no idea about risk management. And so you get those two things together, and it's just a lot of loose and fast money that just is probably could all be lost overnight, which is what we've seen unfortunately too many times.
Yeah, I would say like 2020 and 2021 were like kind of like a perfect storm, right? We had cheap credit, so people levered up, and crypto was in its boom cycle. So
Mhm.
that's I think what really pushed it higher. And now because the Fed was tightening and we've had that these scandals happen and these bankruptcies, I think it's pushed it lower than it should be. So we've had just an extreme volatility generally in
Yeah,
this space because of that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, you got to hold on to your hat if you're in crypto.
Yeah, definitely. And this is my second, I would say, bear market, so I'm not really worried. Like to me, this is kind of like it's kind of something you should expect at this point, right? We're gonna have these peaks and troughs eventually. Once enough money is in here, they'll become more smoothed out. It will function more, I would say, similar to like the stock market, right? But
Mhm.
right now we're just not there yet because the volume isn't there.
Yeah, I agree.
So since you've been in this space actually longer than me, what do you see um, evolving? What's the end goal of crypto from what you're seeing?
I think the end goal has always been alternatives to the current systems. Like what I when I talk about Web3, what I mean is because I think it has a lot of different meanings for people. I mean like an internet experience where I'm in control of my personal data and my privacy. I'm in control of my money by having a digital wallet and controlling the keys to that. Um, I'm in control of like how yeah. So those are the basics, and those are things that we don't really have. Those options are not really available to us right now. You know, if people want to be on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, that you are the product. Like they're taking all of your data and selling it to people that look at it's repackaged and then sold, like presented back to you, through targeted advertising and whatnot. So that's the one thing that I think is the end game that people are working towards. Then I think it's also just mm, maybe more acceptance of this idea of we now have a global payments network. We have several of them now that are uncensorable, and so you can send value all over the world. That's a huge innovation, and I think excuse me, I think the fight there is that it needs to be, we need to keep that. I think OFAC kind of woke a lot of people up to how sanctions can really throw a wrench into public blockchains, because now it really kind of puts the onus on validators, and how are you gonna choose to accept transactions from Tornado Cash, the contract, or not? And so that kind of gets at the heart of what crypto is about, and it's about this decentralized, immutable ethos. And I think the silver lining of OFAC was that I think it woke a lot of people up, and I think people are um, realizing that every part of the system has to be decentralized. Like you can't have, because that's the thing you're trying to get away from, is a centralized point of failure. So if you have Coinbase or some other big validator, kind of service that is then says, okay, I'm not going to allow transactions from this XYZ, part of the web, or part of the chain, then, that's a problem. And so the, I think people are trying to, really encourage people to have nodes in their own homes, and, kind of like really go that route. So I think those are the main ones that I've been thinking about for years. And then more recently, I think it's really opened up a lot of opportunities for artists and musicians, and it's really changing the way that a lot of um, you know basically art works, and because you think about something like the music industry, where that's like the most centralized, kind of old 20th century model you can think of. The record companies are in charge of everything. They've got the money, they've got the resources, they've got the marketing and all that stuff that you need, to be successful as a band or as a musician. But if you can now kind of like introduce NFTs and give musicians like a way of raising money on their own where they don't need that, and then you can kind of cement a relationship with your audience, like even more one-on-one without the record company being in the middle, that really flips the switch there, or flips the script. And I think that's fascinating. And I think we're going to see more and more industries figure out that, like, oh, these problems that we've had in my industry for years are, we can get around these now with using a decentralized kind of peer-to-peer, or creator to consumer, um, like, mode, rather than having some big company in the middle taking a huge cut of every, dollar that's made.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that crypto is definitely going to change how the finance industry works. I'm just not convinced that it will be in the idealistic model because I think the government has amassed a lot of power, right? And like right now in controlling finances, controlling how the financial system works, how will they let go of that, right? And I think you're seeing things like the central bank digital currency that they're talking about. I know there's been a lot of like talk about it. I haven't formed an opinion on it entirely because I just don't know enough. No one's came out with one yet. Besides China, I think the Chinese are testing right now
Mhm.
to actually see where we end up with this. But I do agree. I hope we go end up in the direction that you're saying. I just think there'll probably be some middle ground that will happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I've tried to make the point, in the past, that I don't think crypto is about like replacing the U.S. dollar, or it's about replacing Wall Street. It's not. It's like, you can't do that. That's just not going to happen. At least in the short to medium term, right? So, what it is, though, is it's providing an alternative for people who want a different way of doing things. And so, a lot of people don't care about this, and they won't care, and that's fine. They're just going to keep doing what they're doing. But there are a lot of people who do want to have more control over their privacy, and they don't want to be a product, when they go online. And so, I think, and they do want to have, uh, better relation, like a more direct relationship with artists that they like, and musicians, and painters and things like that. So that's great, and it gives those people that option that never existed before. So I think it's that alternative approach that I find compelling. And I think a lot of skeptics don't kind of wrestle with that idea that it's an alternative. It's not coming for you. It's just like, people are just trying to build this other thing that some people want to use. You don't have to use it, and if you're, screaming all day that it's a scam, that's fine. That's your business. But it's not like we're trying to burn down the world here.
So, what would be the role of like fiat currencies in their current capacity? Let's say once there's mainstream adoption of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, in your opinion?
I think that fiat is going to exist. I think it's just going to go digital. It's like, it's electronic right now, which is, good, but it's still rather slow compared to digital. Because, when I say digital, I mean something that's almost instantaneous. Whereas the electronic system we have now still takes days to, settle a check, or, stock trades take days to settle, and bonds, and all this stuff. So it's, it's not as antiquated as it used to be, but it's still not as cutting edge as something, like Solana, or Ether, in the terms of the settlement layer. So I do think we will have a digital dollar. I hope it's not a central bank digital coin, because I'm not going to use that, because then, the government will know everything you're spending your money on. And so that is a tricky one for me. And I feel like there has to be, at least my thinking now is, there has to be some sort of private, issuer, like, that gets backing from the government, or something like US dollar coin. Or, I mean, I don't want to push Tether, but Tether is pretty amazing. It's existed, and it works for, it's been working for years, even when people are like super skeptical about it, and there's no transparency there. But, you know, as we've seen with all these other things fail in 2022, Tether just kind of chugged along. So something like that is a representation of a digital dollar, or a digital euro, or whatever it might be, that is truly backed by money in a bank and is audited. I think, that's the way to go there. And so, because, fiat It does. It's really important still. Like the whole petro dollar economy that we have in the global market, has been in place since the 70s, and that's I we can get into that some other time, but I think that's kind of starting to change. But the dollar as the reserve currency of the world is still a very important aspect to how global finance works and how everything, the whole correspondent banking system and everything that really like holds things together. The that's really really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think uh, there's a lot of, doomsday people that say that US dollar is not going to be the reserve currency or it's going to collapse. But you know what, to each their own. You can spend time thinking about that, or you can just, live your life and invest in crypto and call it, and who cares what happens.
Yeah.
So I did want to move on to talk about the book you wrote. So do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So it's called Out of the Ether. Um, it is a history of Ethereum. It's all about the people who created Ethereum, starting with Vitalik Buterin, of course. So I kind of trace his life um, from a kid in Russia to moving to Toronto to um, he started attending this really elite school called Yard in Toronto for like really smart kids. He discovered Bitcoin, started writing for Bitcoin publications, and then co-founded Bitcoin Magazine. Got disillusioned with Bitcoin because it was limited, and because he wanted to do more with this like global, network of computers that is a blockchain. And so he kind of went away for a little bit and wrote a white paper about Ethereum, and here we are, like 7 years later or whatever. Um, so it's about him, and it's about the people that he gathered around him once the white paper was out, because he needed partners, to make this thing a reality. He needed coders, he needed people who had money, he needed people who knew how to market things and all sorts of stuff. So it was a ragtag group of people that he brought together. Some people were fired and kicked out within 6 months. It was kind of like always seeming to be on the edge of failure, but they always somehow pulled it off. There was a huge hack that's a big part of the book called, it was the DAO hack in 2016, when $55 million was stolen from a smart contract. Um, the book's also about what we've touched on, about like people like Gavin Wood who have this really strong vision of like what this technology can do to help rid some of the problems we have by centralized actors in the space. Like when Facebook was manipulated in the 2016 presidential election by the Russians, there's an entire hundreds of page long report that the Senate put together about how Russia used Facebook and other social media to, completely manipulate people's opinions and so disinformation and fake news. And so um, I get into that a bit about this is why this is important, and this is why people care about it. And um, I guess lastly, it's just sort of like it's a look. I think it's important that for everybody who's involved in this to know the history of it. It's not just about tomorrow. It's about you need to know the past, and you need to know that Ethereum from the very beginning has never hit a deadline, but they've always delivered on whatever they've promised. So when they're late to do the merge, like if you know the history, you're like that's not a big deal. That's how it's always been, But they're gonna probably deliver, and they did. So it's just stuff like that. And then there's just like fascinating characters, I think, throughout the whole story. Really interesting, like interpersonal dynamics and politics and some backstabbing, and everybody knew they were potentially going to get fabulously wealthy because they had seen what happened with Bitcoin from 2009 to about 2014 or so, when Ethereum was really getting going. So it was just a really fun book to write, and really just had a great time getting to know all the people and hearing their stories and just kind of putting it all together. So it's written kind of in a thriller-ish kind of sort of mode. I like try to keep it moving with different stuff. And honestly, there was so much material to choose from that, like, and so many great characters that it really does, in my opinion, move pretty quickly.
How did you find did you actually end up meeting the Ethereum team?
Oh yeah, yeah. I interviewed Vitalik probably 10 or 12 times in person. So each time for at least an hour. I yeah, I have interviews. It's pretty much the whole book is based on those interviews with people firsthand. I think there's a couple of people I didn't interview. One was Ming Chan. She was the first um, executive director of the Ethereum Foundation. I couldn't get her to talk to me. Had a little hard time getting Gavin Wood to talk to me, but he eventually did. We did an email kind of interview. Jeff Wilkie, excuse me, was another core developer at the beginning. I couldn't get through to him because he's kind of left the space and is doing, I think, like a video game. He started a video game company, so I think he just kind of wanted to leave that stuff in the past. But other than that, I spoke to everybody who was there, every co-founder, like Anthony Diorio, Joe Lubin, Mihai Alisi, all those folks. There was I forgot one person I couldn't get in touch with was Amir Chetrit, who was an original co-founder, but was kind of kicked out after 6 months. I just couldn't reach him. He finally got back to me after the book was done, so it was kind of too late. But yeah, that's why I think, as a reporter, I love, if you're going to reconstruct something like historical, you should be talking to everybody in the room. You shouldn't just be taking it from one or two people. So I really made a huge effort to talk to everybody. Like that was in the original headquarters was in Zug, Switzerland, this place called the Spaceship House. And so like they had a lot of big meetings and a lot of like, consequential decisions were made there. So for those sorts of scenes in the book, I basically talked to 6 or 7 or 8 people that were in the room there, and just like could kind of, after all of those discussions, you could see, okay, this is lining up in everyone's story, so it seems like this is like a good version of what happened here. And so that was a lot of fun because for the most part these were like kids, man. They were like in their 20s, and they were they were just doing it, and didn't had not a lot of them had like serious jobs before. There were some few people who had come from, they were older, and they had, like, Joe Lubin had worked at Goldman Sachs, and Anthony Diorio had real estate businesses and other entrepreneurial things. But for the most part, it's kind of like Vitalik. He was 19 when he came up with Ethereum, so it was a young crew, and they were just like going for it, which I find really amazing.
Do you think there's going to be a movie spinoff later talking about this story? Because I know like the Steve Jobs story is very popular, so I assume this might be one candidate as well.
Yeah, we're working on turning it into a documentary series. Actually, after I get off with you, I'm talking to the production company that we're working with, who's optioned my book. So that's one movie I know of. I think there's other Ethereum movies in the works, but I don't really know much about them, whether they're kind of fictional or whether they're trying to be documentaries. But it is a it's a fascinating story. It's got crime and drama and interpersonal conflict and weirdos and smart people, and they make, everyone makes a ton of money. Billionaires are born, and so it's got it all. It's just, as I've learned going through this process with trying to make out of the ether into like a documentary, Hollywood's a little bit behind here, and there's some people in Hollywood who get like Web3 and blockchain, but I don't think I think they're kind of in the minority right now. So, and it's a tough one to make a movie about, when it's like kind of like about coding and nerdy people, sitting in a room with laptops. Like a lot of that's not super fun. But like I said, there's other elements to it that are really fascinating. So I think sooner or later we'll get a great movie, either Hollywood style or a documentary.
Biggest question: if this was a Hollywood movie, who would play Vitalik?
God, who's the guy? I don't. He's not exactly the right fit, but the guy that was in the what was the robot show? Um, He's got big eyes. He reminds me of Vitalik a little bit, but man, Vitalik is a tough one to cast for because he's got a very unique just presence.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone. I was talking that to my friend. If there was a movie made, okay, I have no idea who would play him.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be a tough one.
Yeah. But anyways, to close out the podcast, how can people get in touch with you? Where can they find your book? What's your website?
Yeah, the website is decentral.io. That's DECENTIAL.io. Um, I'm on Twitter at Matt Leising. We're also on Twitter at Decentral Media. Um, you can find my book on Amazon or wherever you want. Yeah, don't try bookstores. I've tried that and I've never found my book on the shelf there yet. So try online and you'll find it. If you want a special edition of the book that only 1,000 were printed and are convertible into an NFT, you can go to outoftheether.net and check that out there. So it's like a one of 1,000 NFT that we did. You get the actual book. It's no different than anything else, except it's got a special cover. And then you can mint an NFT on the blockchain for it. And let's see, yeah, that about covers it. Where you can find me, Decentral.io is probably the best place to go for that stuff.
Awesome. I'll throw these links all in the podcast description, so you'll be able to find this. Matt, we'll connect with you after, and you'll send me those links.
Yeah,
Uh,
great. Thank.
awesome. Thank you for coming on. I think this was a great discussion, especially from someone who's been reporting in this industry to clarify the FTX situation, because there's a lot of rumors out there, and this is great.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you for having me on, Dalibor. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. All right, guys. See you next time.